Hello, everyone. As we start to go live on SASA's platforms, sorry I'm kind of a ghost voice in the background today, but I'm Lauren with SASA, and I am here to introduce the stream. I'm so excited for Death from Above in the Babylonian Astronomical Omens with Meszaros is back with us again. If you came to any of the was a reading group or masterclass over the summer too, and slash probably many other things too, right? So what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies Alliance. We work to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper past, building a grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship. We work towards our goal of inspiring a wide, inclusive community of scholars, learners, and students. And right now it's our Halloween Bash fundraiser, which is one of our main fundraisers of the year. So we have a ton of events and stuff going on. So please check that out and join us on our live streams. We love seeing you there and hearing from you during the streams. You can find us basically anywhere you search Save Ancient Studies Alliance. Please do make sure to like and follow our pages, share our content. It really helps so much more than you think. And that's kind of the whole point of our organization, is to get ancient studies stuff out there and accessible to people. So protocol for the event, please be kind and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions. Again, we would love to hear from you from the chat. EL knows all about this. Like, we're here to talk with you and answer your questions and stuff. Please be patient with technology. Hopefully we won't have any issues. They're streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, actually. Sorry, that's from our Archeo Gaming streams are only on Twitch. But it will be saved on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. And of course, have fun. Last but not least, again, this is our Halloween Bash fundraiser. So our goal for the fundraiser is to get some more monthly supporters for as little as $5 a month. So if you like what you see from SASA, please consider supporting us. We are totally grassroots NGO that gets some grants for some certain projects. So really everything helps, including sharing and following our pages. You can also subscribe on Twitch if you're more of a gamer. And we have very cool Halloween collection at our bazaar right now, which was designed by one of our past interns, Sarah. And that's just everything I have. So thank you for joining us, and I will hand it over to EL.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining me today. I'm going to take over sharing my screen, which hopefully you can see. Nice. Nicely done. Okay, so yeah, I'm EL. I am a freshly minted PhD from Brown University in Egyptology and Assyriology, which means I study the past and I study Babylonia in particular. My focus has always been on history of science, and what I love most is Babylonian astronomy. And that's what I'm here to talk to you a little bit about today, especially in the context of spooky season and Halloween. So to lay some groundwork a little bit, I'm going to bring up my cool laser pointer for fun. And I'll hide that. So Halloween has long been associated with practices of divination and fortune telling. And this is Halloween in like all the different forms it's taken, from Samhain through the British Islands and into America. There's usually some aspect of fortune telling embodied in this holiday. You'll see even in modern day practices of Halloween, fortune teller booths come around this time of year. The quote I'm showing you here is from an article in a magazine from like 1898. So it's pretty ancient. Not by the standards of someone who studies Babylonia, but I guess by magazine standards. But you can tell even here they're using walnut shells or hickory nuts to fortune tell their the fate of their love lives, right? We do spookier things now. I think the Ouija board is also often associated with Halloween. Has to do with the idea that the veil between the living and the dead world is lifted, and there gets to be some porous boundary, some crossover in between. I wanted to use this opportunity of the fact that divination is rooted in this holiday to talk about divination practices from long before Samhain, from long before Halloween, when we can talk about very different kinds of divination, specifically in Mesopotamia. So one thing that looks like in Mesopotamia is this, and it may be hard for you to tell, but this here is the image of a liver. It's actually a clay tablet in the shape of a liver. You can see some cuneiform writing on here that encodes fortune being told with this liver. This refers to the practice of haruspicy or haruspex, which is liver divination, liver telling, where you would use the entrails of a dead animal to tell whether an event would be good or bad. This was practiced in ancient Babylonia. It's also practiced in ancient Greece and a lot of different ancient cultures as well. Mesopotamian divination used haruspicy. They used liver fortune telling. They also told fortunes based on which direction the wind blew smoke and shapes that were seen in flour scattered on the ground. They could use different events in everyday life, like a lizard running across your path, and view that as ominous and leading to some sort of fortune. But what I want to focus on today, given my specific interest, is the Mesopotamian fascination with astronomical and astrological omens. That is how our Mesopotamian astronomers read the events in the nighttime sky and used it to indicate what was going to be happening here on Earth. So just a heads up, if y'all have any questions in the chat at any time, I've got an eye on it, so feel free to drop them. I'll try to answer them as I go, but I'll leave some time at the end for questions too, if you have them. So just to sort of orient us, not to the holiday, but to the area that I'll be talking about. And this is a map of what we might call the Middle East now. You can see Iran, Syria, and Iraq. In the time period that I'm going to be talking about, which is roughly the first millennium BCE. This is home to two sort of areas, two regions, Assyria and Babylonia. Assyria in the north, Babylonia in the south, which were established around the second millennium BCE. The texts we'll be looking at predominantly, in this case, come from Babylonia. And they're roughly going to come from around 800 BCE, but the knowledge that they contain were encoded and codified long before that. So this is our geographical region. And I want to start by talking about a specific text, and I'll get into detail about why I'm doing that in a second. But when we talk about astronomical divination, when we talk about astrology in ancient Mesopotamia, the one text that scholars think about predominantly, especially scholars, historians of astronomy in particular, is a text called Enuma Anu Enlil. So this is the name of a text here. It's both the name that we call it, but also the name that ancient Babylonian practitioners would have called it too. And this is what part of it might look like. The image on the right can be found on the British Museum website, and if you're lucky enough to live near the British Museum, you could pop by and see it if you'd like. This is just one part of the roughly 70 tablets that make up the entire text of Enuma Anu Enlil. That is, this text is going to need 69 more of these bad boys to encode all the information that's contained in it. Not all of them have been transliterated and translated and published for modern scholars. Some are still awaiting that. But these 70 tablets all contain omens related to some aspect of the sky. So they're all roughly astronomical omens. We know that the information contained in them, the scientific information, was probably originating back to the second millennium BCE, but in particular, this tablet you're seeing here comes from the 7th century BCE. And it contains omens that are all in the form of if P, then Q. This is the standard way that we talk about it in the field. P and Q are just any statements. So what we're saying here is if something happens, then something else will happen. So there's this association, the then as being somehow a result of the if. There's also a few mathematical schemes contained in the full text of Enuma Anu Enlil. We're not super concerned with that today. If you've heard me talk before, if you've attended one of my workshops or master classes, I love the mathematical astronomy, but we're staying clear of that today. We're just focusing on the omens and the divination. So like I say, though, there are 70 tablets of this, and that's a ton of text. That's a lot to belong to one series, and they can be broken down into roughly different areas of focus. So the first 13 tablets focus on the moon. They're focused on the visibility and appearance of the moon. Then we get one tablet filled with astronomical schemes that we're mostly ignoring today. And then we get one that's focused specifically on the lunar eclipses. So if you think of this whole 22 tablet beginning as focused on the moon. Then we get another couple of tablets focused on the sun, and then some on solar eclipses. So the first more than half is just on what's happening with the sun and what's happening with the moon. Then we get some on weather phenomena, and then finally the final 20 tablets or so are related to the movement of the planets and the appearance of stars in the sky. A couple of things we should talk about here. When I say that Enuma Anu Enlil is filled with astronomical material and its astrological divination, you might wonder why weather phenomena gets to be counted among that. This is happening in the sky, it's true, but it's happening much lower in the sky than what we traditionally think of as outer space, as the realm of astronomy. To our Babylonian astronomers, there was no such division, though. So things happening in the sky, like, say, a rainbow or red clouds as a result of some phenomenon, all of this got to be considered in the realm of astronomy. So ominous events could be happening in the region of the sky much closer to Earth, and Enuma Anu Enlil accounts for that as well. So we get to see some omens about that. I want to take us through just a couple of omens from a couple of different categories. We'll read what the omens are saying. We'll talk about sort of the science behind it and the type of astronomical knowledge encoded in this divinatory text. And then I'd like to end by talking about one of my favorite rituals from the period that's related to astronomical omens. So in particular, I want to start with some planetary omens, and I'll look at the ones for Venus. So this comes from a bit of tablet 50, what we call tablet 50. And these omens are all related to the planet Venus. If Venus and the great star meet, the king will die and the dynasty will change. Sorry, let me take that one more time. If Venus and the great star meet, the king will die. Okay, cool. If above Venus the great star goes around her, or variant stands, the angry gods will return to the land. Copious rains will fall, the crops of the land will succeed. If above Venus a small star goes around her, variant stands, the gods will return to the land, break. If Venus in her right horn a star comes close to her, variant something, there will be plenty in the land. If Venus in her left horn a star comes close to her, variant something, there will be misfortune in the land. Okay, so there's a lot we have to talk about here. This is just a handful of omens. There's many, many more just related to Venus, and then also many others related to Mercury and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn as well, the planets that were identified by our Babylonian astronomers. Some of this is maybe more apparent. The if Venus and the great star meet, that's the if P part of our conditional sentence. So what has to be true for this omen to come true? Well, Venus and something called the great star have to meet in the sky. If that happens, then what happens after the colon here, that's the then Q part of the conditional. So if those stars meet, then the king will die and the dynasty will change. So this is an example of a pretty dire omen, right? This is foretelling death of the king, which is a pretty big deal in a land that has a king. Also a pretty big deal if you are the king and you don't want to die. But there's some weird stuff happening too. For instance, in a lot of these, we see the word variant. We also see this word break, and that can make the reading of these omens a little bit confusing. So before I dive more deeply into what these are saying, I want to talk a bit about the scribal process. That is how these texts were created and maintained in Mesopotamia in such a way that they could last all the way down to us. And that's going to explain some of the stuff that's happening in this text here. So let's talk about the scribal tradition. So as part of the educational system and as part of sort of the scholarly community of ancient Mesopotamia, there is a system of copying put into place. There would be sets of standard texts that were viewed almost the way we could think of like textbooks today, that they would contain all the information needed for a field. And one of the ways you would go about both learning that information and acquiring the art of literacy, that is learning the cuneiform script that this was written in and the Akkadian language that it was recorded in, was by copying the existing tablets. That means for us as modern scholars that we often have multiple versions of the same text from different periods throughout Babylonian history. This allows us to put together a whole text from a lot of fragmentary sources. These are written in clay, and clay is much sturdier than like papyrus fragments for sure, but it still can get broken. And most of the tablets that we find are broken in some areas. But because they exist in multiple copies, we can often reconstruct what the entire text will say. But it also means that sometimes scribes themselves were working from copies that disagreed with each other or that were themselves broken. So if we return to our Venus omens, the variant that you see here is referring to the fact that two of the sources for this disagreed on what the if part of this conditional was. One said that if Venus and the great star goes around her, the other said that if Venus and the great star stands. So there's a slight difference here. Our author on this particular tablet is recording them both. That's all the cases of variant you see are referring to that same type of process. The break that you see that's written here, this is not trying to tell us that there is a literal break in the tablet we're looking at. Instead, it's recording that in the tablet that the writer of this text was looking at, there was a break. So this word break is actually written in Akkadian on our text. It's a remnant of the sort of hard process of a text surviving over the years and centuries and millennia into the present day. Okay, that's the basic scribal tradition in a very tiny nutshell, but we should also talk a little bit about the astronomy here. So many of the omens for the planets are related to their positions in the sky. In particular, Babylonian astronomers were interested in what constellations the planets were moving through or near. And so often you'll see things like Venus and a particular star meeting. Now, we don't always know exactly what stars our Babylonian astronomers are referring to. In some cases, it's pretty clear. And that's often because it's part of a lasting tradition of astronomy that got passed down through Greek and Islamic texts all the way to the modern day. So there's like an unbroken tradition of, hey, these are the constellations that the planets appear to pass through on the ecliptic. And so we know these zodiacal constellations. Other times they're a little trickier to identify. We don't have a ton of texts that would say, hey, the way you find this particular constellation is focus on this part of the sky and draw this shape. We're missing a lot of texts like that. We, as Assyriologists, would love to find texts that went through the process for a lot of the scientific knowledge contained from Mesopotamia, but we're just missing it, unfortunately. So one thing that this could be, there's a zodiacal constellation that we know as Aquarius that is referred to as the Great One. I think it's unlikely that this is the Great One because this is specifically referring to a singular star, and the Great One was a constellation. We also see this put explicitly against something called the small star. That is, at first, we're seeing, the great star and Venus's position near the great star, and then we get Venus's position near a small star. This type of opposites being mentioned one after another in omens is very common, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So that's generally what we see for the planets and for Venus here. But I'd like to spend a little time then focusing on some lunar eclipse omens and some moon omens too, because I think these are fun. They're also, for what it's worth, included in the first tablets of the series, so perhaps there's some sort of primacy given to them. Before I dive into that, it's worth talking a little bit about what eclipses are. This is something that you may have seen in the news lately. There have been a number of solar eclipses passing through very populated areas. So often we will hear talk about going out and watching carefully with protective eye gear for solar eclipses. But we should talk about the difference, right? So, spooky images of the eclipse. So a lunar eclipse happens when the moon gets directly in between the sun and the earth. Solar eclipses happen when the moon gets directly in between the sun and the earth, and the moon's shadow falls on the earth. Lunar eclipses happen when the opposite is true, when the Earth gets in between the sun and the moon, when the moon is on the opposite side of the Earth from the sun. That is the Earth's shadow falling entirely on the moon. So generally in modern culture, we give a lot of weight to solar eclipses. I think they're a little more striking because you get that, day turning into night, the sun being blotted out by a seeming shadow, and it can feel very spooky and cool. But solar eclipses have the benefit, I don't know, they have the interesting phenomenon that they only occur for a small portion of the Earth, right? Only the places where the shadow of the moon lands on the Earth are going to see that eclipse. So in this case, the eclipse seems to be happening right in the Pacific Ocean. So there's some islands that'll see it, but not a lot of others. However, the lunar eclipses are visible everywhere. So lunar eclipses actually got to be much more important, especially to our Babylonian astronomers. We see a lot more emphasis on the meaning of lunar eclipses. And as we'll see later, they seem to be much more dire too. You needed to do things to prevent the impact of a lunar eclipse. It's worth noting, just for those interested in the science, that lunar and solar eclipses don't happen every time that the Earth is directly on one side of the moon or the other, because the moon's path is tilted a little from the sun's path. So only when it's right where the path of the moon crosses the path of the sun, which we would call a node, do you get an actual lunar or solar eclipse. Our Babylonian astronomers were pretty good at predicting them. By the time, the tablet I showed you at the beginning, by the time of the 7th century, they had knowledge that eclipses of the sun and moon could take place within half a month from each other, and that eclipses of the same kind happened roughly every 5 or 6 months after each other. So they were able to start predicting not just the occurrence of an eclipse, but also the specific time of an eclipse after not too long. One place where this appears is in records of letters written to the king. So we have a whole collection of letters recovered from the palace that have been translated and made available. One letter to the king, I've included a translation on the right here, says that eclipses cannot occur during certain periods. After 4 months, there was a watch in a particular month, and now in the next month, we will keep again a watch, etc. This is broken afterwards. So I know it says as these watches and then seems to peter out. That's because the tablet's broken. We just don't have any more of the text remaining. But this is an interesting letter for us because it shows us that even at the time this was written in what we would call the Neo-Assyrian period, the Babylonian astronomers were aware that there were certain periods where we wouldn't see eclipses. That's because, again, the fact that the moon's path is a little out of alignment with the sun's path. So our astronomers didn't necessarily have an understanding of the tilted path of the moon compared to the sun, but they did know that there were going to be breaks in periods of time where eclipses weren't possible. And the scientists, the astronomers, were able to keep an accurate watch because of that. Okay, so let's actually look at the omens. That's what this is about. Here's a handful of lunar eclipse omens. If a lunar eclipse occurs in the month Nisanu, that's the first month of the year, starts at the vernal equinox, so roughly March to April. In the evening watch, there will be famine, and brother will consume brother. If an eclipse occurs in Nisanu in the middle watch, the harvest of the land will not thrive, or variant, there will be famine. If an eclipse occurs in Nisanu in the morning watch, the king will send messages of reconciliation to the king. All right, so what's happening here? Well, we understand the science. If an eclipse is happening, and this is specifically if a lunar eclipse is happening, but now we have a specific month specified and also a evening, middle, and morning watch. So this is a division of the day into watches. That is a third of the day, basically. So if in the nighttime there is an eclipse, then here's the terrible, vile thing that is predicted. Then if in the middle portion, and then in the morning portion. So we get the day divided into bits, but we can also start to see that, well, the Venus omen, we did see one that hailed the death of the king. Here we see some almost wholly bad omens, right? King reconciling with another king, that's okay, but there will be famine. There will be famine. The harvest will not thrive. Brother will consume brother. Pretty dire, pretty terrible. So this is very common with the lunar eclipse omens. And the other thing worth mentioning here is that all three of these omens are just for the event that a lunar eclipse occurs in the first month. Now, I didn't provide these for you, but you can bet that in the rest of the text, there are 3 more eclipse prediction omens listed for the next months of the year. The Babylonians had a year that they divided into 12 months. There is sometimes a 13th intercalary month added in, just to make sure that the calendar stayed in alignment with the seasons. But each of those months then would have their own, if in the evening watch, if in the middle watch, if in the morning watch, what those omens would mean. This is very standard practice for Babylonian omens. The practitioners really liked to, what's the best way to say this? Create like a full schema. So they would want to cover what happens in one month, but what happens if the eclipse happens in another month, and what happens if it happens in the third month. We saw the same thing a little bit with the Venus omens. What happens if Venus passes the great star? Well, then what happens if Venus passes the little star? There's this sense of completionism almost, where the astronomers want to account for every possibility. In this case, with the lunar omens, that is every possible month of the year and every possible watch of every possible month in the year. You'll see this with a lot of opposites in the omens too. So like what will happen if the moon is full, and then what will happen if the moon is new? What will happen if in one zodiacal constellation versus another zodiacal constellation? It's a type of completionism that we see a lot in this corpus of text. And it leads us to one other aspect of these omens that is, I think, of particular interest, which is if you have the ability to predict a lunar eclipse, if your science is so advanced that you know how frequently they occur, when the next one is likely to occur, even what time it's likely to occur, what watch of the day it's likely to occur, and you know what that eclipse means, if you know that it spells ill for the land, then surely there must be something you can do to prevent it. And this is not always the case in every divinatory practice, right? It's not always the case to change your fate once you read it. But our Babylonian astronomers were big fans of what we would call apotropaic rituals, that is, rituals to turn against evil, to turn away evil, to prevent the evil of the omen from coming true. One such apotropaic ritual is the substitute king ritual, which is one of my favorites to talk about. We know of the substitute king ritual from some of those aforementioned letters that I said. So this is one case where it's referenced obliquely in the letters. So the letter begins, "May Nabu and Marduk bless the king. A certain Akulanu, an astronomer, has written, the sun made an eclipse of 2 fingers at sunrise. There is no apotropaic ritual against it. It is not like a lunar eclipse. If you say, I'll write down the relevant interpretation and send it to you." I've given you a picture over here of what that letter looks like. You can see broken a little at the top. But what this is saying to us that is of interest, I believe, is that the sun has made an eclipse. This is a solar eclipse, not a lunar eclipse. And for the solar eclipse, there is no apotropaic ritual, which specifically tells us then that there is an apotropaic ritual for the lunar eclipse. This is an explicit reference of that. So what is that apotropaic ritual? Well, okay, so if the king is going to die because of a lunar omen, then one thing you can do is let that happen, but maybe make the king someone who's less important than the real king. And that is what our Babylonians did. They changed out the king and they let someone else step into his place for just the length of time for the omen to come true, or for them to make the omen come true. And then the king would reascend to the throne after the omen's ill effects had happened. That is, they would literally substitute someone else into the throne so that they could die, and then the real king could come back. As you can imagine, this was not... It's an interesting role in that the substitute king, who was often called the farmer, but like in heavy quotes, right? The substitute king would be treated like the king in that they would be banqueted and feasted, but they, and in that sense, would be given the honor of having this great position thrust upon them. But it does need to end in death, and so it is honor with a big old caveat next to it. My chat is no longer loading, so if y'all have chat, if you have questions, oh, I think I've got it going again. Cool. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat. So sorry about that. Yeah, so sometimes, though, this substitute king was not like a voted volunteer as tribute type of position. Sometimes this was left for prisoners of war too. So you could be elected into this position, and not the best way. And knowing that it ends in death is maybe not ideal as well. So we have examples of this from the texts too. So this is from a letter to the king. But in this case, it's a letter to the substitute king. So the traditional introductory line, instead of saying to the king, now says to the farmer, "My lord, may your servant Nabu Zeru thus share good health. My lord, may Nabu and Marduk bless my lord for many years. I wrote down whatever signs there were, be they celestial, terrestrial, or of malformed births, and had them recited in front of Shamash, one after the other. The substitute king and queen were treated with wine, washed with water, and anointed with oil. I had those birds cooked and made them eat them. The substitute king of the land of Akkad took the signs on himself." So this is how they treat the substitute king, right? Wine, anointed with oil, feasts of birds. He cried out, "Because of what ominous sign have you enthroned a substitute king?" And he claims, "Say, in the presence of the farmer, on the evening of the whatever day, we were drinking wine. Saliah gave bribes to his servant Nabu Utsali, and meanwhile he inquired about Nicoladina, Shama Shibni, and Nayad Marduk, speaking about upheaval of the country. Seize the fortified places one after another. He is to be watched carefully. He should no longer belong to the entourage of the farmer. His servant Nabu Utsali should be questioned. He will spill everything." So here we're getting a discussion from the scholar writing this letter of those in the service of the substitute king, in the substitute king's retinue, sort of failing to act in the appropriate way. So this discussion of the substitute king is, it appears in a number of letters, and we know it was performed a number of times. We see it being performed much more frequently during the reigns of some Neo-Assyrian kings than others. And there is some thought that perhaps the use of this apotropaic ritual could be viewed as a sign of I don't know, anxiety, a sign of being really paranoid at the end of a reign. And some of our Neo-Assyrian kings did not meet good fates themselves. There's lots of family infighting, shall we say. So perhaps they had good reason to be paranoid, and they just enacted these rituals in service of the gods and to ward off the ill will of the lunar eclipse omens. So just return quickly here at the end to some of the contents again of these omens. The substitute king ritual is pretty big. It's a big deal. The whole palace really has to get behind it in order to enact it. Most of the apotropaic rituals, if they existed, if there were ways to turn away the evil, were much smaller. They did not involve killing a fake substitute for the enthroned king. But many of them also just didn't have apotropaic rituals to go along with them. There's a lot of debate sort of in the field about whether we should view these omens in a sense of prognostication, like in a sense of, oh, this is certainly going to happen, or if it's something that could be changed if you were to take the right ritual course of action. So you can maybe make your mind up for yourself about what you believe. We can draw some themes out in general from Enuma Anu Enlil, from the text itself. And that is that these astronomical omens are almost always not for the individual. They are just for the king or the country. So I guess they're for the individual, but only in the one event where you are the royal sovereign of the nation. So astronomical omens where the sky itself, the entirety of the night sky and the heavens are speaking to the populace. Those don't get to give messages to the lowly individual, the regular layperson. Those messages refer only to the entire country or to the king. We do also see them listed frequently in groups of related or schematic phenomena. If something happens on the right, it will also happen on the left. If it happens above, it will also happen below. If it happens to something red, it will also happen to something green and blue and yellow. If it happens in one part of a constellation, it'll happen in another part of the constellation. And interestingly, opposite phenomena also have often opposite outcomes. So if something good happens when something is viewed on the right half of the body, then if it's viewed on the left half, something bad might happen. The opposite parts of the conditional would lead to opposite parts of the omen itself. So these are, generally speaking, the themes for astronomical omens. This is not the case for every type of omen, I will say. So we do have lots of other divinatory practices, as I mentioned, a lizard running across your path, but smoke omens and flower omens, sheep omens, liver omens. All of this would be able to apply to an individual. So you could read the haruspices for a particular decision that you were making. And frequently, astronomical omens would be verified or could be verified by other liver omens too. So often these types of divination were in conversation with each other and not just used independently. Okay, so I want to give you a chance, if you are interested, to sort of craft your own omens with a memory to the themes of Enuma Anu Enlil here, that our omens are not going to be for the individual, that they're always related to the king, related to the country, and that if you do have an omen for something happening on the right side of Aquarius, you should probably have something for the left side of Aquarius too, part of the schematic conditional. But we can also talk then a little bit while you take your opportunity to craft your omens, and if interested, share them in the chat with us, to talk a little bit about what these astronomical omens were part of, that is the larger astronomical tradition. So Enuma Anu Enlil was used throughout Babylonian astronomy for centuries. It was copied well into the first millennium, such that we know it well as modern scholars because enough copies survived. But this was just a bit of a larger astronomical praxis. If you know me, you know I like to talk about the later mathematical astronomy. And the mathematical astronomy of Babylonia is fairly intricate. They were able to predict the phenomena of the planets extraordinarily well. This formed the basis of the later Greek astronomy, which formed the basis of later medieval astronomy and has become the astronomy we know today. And the Greek astronomers used data from the Babylonians because they recorded it so well and accurately, but also because they came up with astronomical information. They calculated like the length of the synodic month so well that the Greek astronomers could just borrow it. And all of this intricate and profound mathematical astronomy was done by the same people who are writing these astronomical omens. There's no division in this period between astrology on one hand and the use of astral divination, and astronomy on the other hand, the idea that the heavens can be studied as a science. All of that is done by the same people, grouped together, operating in one world. So the same astronomy that fed into these omens also fed into the development of predictive schemes. It's all one and the same. And that leads me to one other point that's worth discussing too, which is that it's worth considering where the information for these astronomical omens in Babylonia came from. It makes a certain amount of sense and feels, I think, very intuitive to think that at some point in the past, we know Babylonian astronomers were watching the night sky, that they observed the movement of Venus in front of a particular constellation, and something happened in the country at that moment. And because of that timing, they then created an association between an astronomical event and an ominous goings on the planet. So it can be, I think, really, it can feel nice to think that at some point, all of the omens in Enuma, Anu, Enlil had an origin in the real world, an observed phenomenon and an observed event that led them to create and establish this causal connection. If Venus does this, then famine will happen in the land because that's what happened the last time there was famine in the land. And it's certainly possible for some of them. It's certainly possible that there was some event in the past that led Babylonian people to associate an astronomical event with something on the planet, but not for all of them. And this is, I think, one of the interesting parts of this schematic idea of the omens. So the omens seem to be so interested in filling out a full schema, in getting every single right and left possibility, and getting every single month of the year, that we sometimes get omens for physically impossible events. So say a lunar eclipse can only happen during the full moon. And we'll get omens that specify what happens if a lunar eclipse is observed on the 14th or the 15th of the month in Babylonia, which according to the Babylonian calendar, that's when the full month occurs. So that's totally fine. But then we'll also get omens that'll say, well, here's the ominous event that will happen if the lunar eclipse is observed on the 10th of the month when there is no full moon, or on the 5th of the month when there definitely is no full moon and you're much closer to the new moon. And this just cannot happen. We need the full moon because that's when the moon and sun are in the correct alignment for the Earth's shadow to fall on the moon. So it's just physically impossible for there to have been observed one like that. And what that tells us is at least some of the omens in Enuma, Anu, Enlil have to be there just to fill out the schema, which means if you're crafting your own omen at this very moment, then feel free to create an astronomical omen that you know will never happen. That's okay. That's in keeping with the Babylonian tradition, is what I'll say. And because we know that to be true, because we know that some of these omens just cannot have been observed, it lets us question whether any of them were actually observed, or is this an intellectual enterprise more than an observational enterprise? So maybe just here at the end, unless anyone wants to drop their own omens for us to read to the group, I'll throw some of the lunar eclipse omens back up so you can have an idea of what these look like once again, and some of the bad things that are foretold for Mesopotamia given the occurrence of the lunar eclipse. Again, I think it's interesting for us as modern scholars to think about the lunar eclipse in particular, because these happen much more frequently than I think we're even aware of. We tend to focus in on the presence of a solar eclipse, but for Babylonian astronomers, this one was the big deal. This is the one that led to the substitute king ritual because it foretold the death of the king. So it's about 12:45. Unless anyone wants to share their omens, then I will open up the floor here for questions. I'm happy to take questions about anything related to, the omen tradition in Mesopotamia, and specifically the text Enuma, Anu, Enlil. But I'd also be willing to entertain questions about Babylonian astronomy in general. I don't have a great knowledge about modern divinatory practice, so those questions are probably best saved for another source.
Okay, well, we have a small little break to see if anyone says anything in the chat, which please do. EL is like a wealth of knowledge. I just want to say thank you so much. This was so interesting. Like, I've just been like zoning out listening the whole time. I'm not a writer, you guys. I cannot write an omen. It would probably be something like that benefits dogs getting everything they want. If the moon is shiny, dogs will get everything they want.
I love that for them. I think that's great. And if we're keeping with the schema idea, unfortunately, that means we should consider what happens when the moon isn't shiny, and probably it's something devastating for dogs, unfortunately.
Yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully, just like maybe let's make it like they just won't get treats one day.
One day, but no more.
But yes, and yes, thank you, Cindy.
Yeah,
very much.
I will say, Enuma Anu Enlil isn't the only place we get. It's not the only place we get omens. We have other groups of omens, especially related to other areas, but it's also not the only place we get astronomical omens. For those of you who've heard me talk about Mul Oppen, I'm leading a reading group on that right now with a different group. And if any of you are here, there are astral omens contained in the text Mul Oppen. Mul Oppen is generally considered like an astronomical compendium. It's filled with mathematical schemes for astronomy, for predicting the length of the shadow given the placement of the sun. Stuff that we would really consider a hard science compared to perhaps the pseudoscience of astrology. And yet we still find omens on that tablet. And here in Enuma Anu Enlil, which is filled with omens, it's filled with astrology, we do get that one tablet that does have mathematical schemes there. So just as another example of the fact that these areas of interest were certainly combined in the ancient world.
Okay, I have one question as a classicist. Like, how does it compare to things, I guess, from like any civilization, you know, of like even just like the prescribed format of it that's kind of like if this, then that. I feel like that's pretty common throughout the world.
Yeah.
But you know, just like, do you think other cultures like have more like I don't know, I feel like some other cultures is more focused on like good omen like stuff, although maybe we were just talking about bad ones today. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, so you're right, there certainly are some good omens. Here, the bottom one, a reconciliation of kings, that could be viewed as good, surely, but it is definitely more fun to focus on the bad ones. It feels more dire, especially here in spooky season.
Yes, exactly.
So a couple of ways to answer that. So we know that something like an eclipse was also viewed as an ill omen in other ancient cultures as well. There's a long tradition in China in particular of an eclipse spelling out that the king has lost the mandate of heaven. And so you'll see eclipses predicted or observed right before there's a dynasty change and a new king takes the throne. But as far as Greek in particular is concerned, I don't know much about Greek omens. I do know as Greek astrology owes a lot to Babylonian astrology in like the development of the zodiac and passing that sort of information on. But they really make it their own. So the idea of personal horoscopy, the idea that you can tell someone's personal fortune by the alignment of planets on their day of birth, really comes from Greece. We see it a little bit in Babylonia, but really not until the Hellenistic period. So likely once there is a trade of information between Greece and Babylonia. So my guess is if we did see in this format, the if-then format, very common. But if we did see similar types of astral omens, it's probably made into its own thing in the Greek world.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That and I feel like I mean, I don't know much specifically about omens in the Greek world, but I feel like things a lot are more like personalized. Like you were saying, like this is all the way that it's personalized is for the king specifically. And I guess I don't know, is there stuff in Babylonian that is more like, I don't know if it would be more like just ritualistic prayer kind of stuff then though.
Yeah, so there is some personalized divination for sure. It tends not to be the astral omens, so it tends to be individual sightings of like a calf born with two heads or something.
Yeah.
But we don't have a ton of records of it. So the other thing is that it's possible that it was happening, and it was just happening not in a place where it was being recorded and written down.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, probably. Right?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And Cindy mentions the Maya too, which is a great note. Unfortunately, a lot of the Mayan material was lost to us when the conquistadors burned all the codices, but the ones we do have remaining to us do describe a really intricate astronomy where they were able to predict the movement of planets and eclipses as well. So yeah, that would be another great culture to look into for eclipse omens, for astral omens too.
Oh yes, for sure. Yay. Well, if no one has any questions or anything else to comment, of course, thank you so much. I mean, I want to listen to you talk forever, you guys. I love when EL comes to do stuff with us. So become a member and check out events that we'll have coming up. I'm sure you'll be back around. And thank you all so much for joining us. I was literally so captivated the whole time. You guys, I did not pull up the little QR codes for the Halloween bash, but I didn't want to like cover up your thing either. So please go check out stuff for the Halloween bash. We have a few more events coming up and we'd love to see you there. They will be live streamed. Again, this is one of our 2 main fundraisers of the year. So even just sharing our stuff really helps so much. You can, of course, become a member for free and get our monthly newsletter where it outlines all our wonderful events like this, which we have lots more throughout the year. So please do come back to join us. And again, EL, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. And happy Halloween, everyone. It's actually coming now. Okay, bye.